Hey everyone, people are going to start joining shortly. We just went live. It is February 19th, 2020. Ready for another episode. So here we go, Mythic Legions Cabal. It's Wednesday night. You know what that means? It's time for another episode of Mythic Conversations. Thank you all for joining. Hello, everyone. Chris, Eric, nice to have you here. Walter, all the way from Argentina, thank you for joining us live. So let me start. For those that may be tuning in for the first time, some quick introductions. If you don't know who I am, my name is Jeremy Gerard. I am a Mythic Legions collector and customizer. I also have the distinct privilege of working with Four Horsemen Studios as the digital marketing manager in charge of everything at sourcehorseman.com. If you want to see more of my work, you can check me out online. What you need to remember is the name Mythic Customs, all one word. I post daily on Instagram as Mythic Customs. You can also check out all of those photos that I post on Instagram. I also reshare those photos along with the recipes for every figure I create on my website, which is mythiccustoms.com. And then these videos, these Mythic Conversation videos, I'm here live every Wednesday night at 7:30. If you can't catch it live any given week, no problem. I repost this every week in the Mythic Legions Cabal. And also on Thursday mornings, I repost this video on YouTube as well. You can find me on YouTube as Mythic Customs. That's all you got to remember. So we've got a bunch of people joining here. I said hi to a few already. Anthony, happy to have you here. Leland, Eric, Aaron, Chris, thank you everyone for joining. Brian, Ryan, Drew. I feel like it's, Mr. Rogers' neighborhood here. I see Leland and Aaron and Nate and Anthony. Once again, thank you everyone for joining. So tonight is part 2 of a conversation we started last week. If you missed last week's discussion, don't worry about it. You can always catch that replay, but you don't actually need to have seen last week to understand what we're talking about tonight. This is the 2-part conversation about adding custom heads to your Mythic Legions. So like most weeks, we're going to start talking briefly about kind of what's going on in the world of Mythic Legions, what news has happened since last week's show. Then we're going to go right into the discussion, talk a bit about the topic at hand, and all the while, this is a live broadcast. That's one of the nice things about this format is you can ask questions, you can make comments, I can respond to those. Okay, so actually it's been kind of a little bit of a quiet week, I think. What's up, Mike, Andrew, Amy, Corn Boy's on. Hey, what's up? Nice to have you here. So I was saying it's actually been a little bit of a quiet week, I think, for Mythic Legions. We've got the All-Stars 3 pre-order that's going on. That's great. That ends tentatively on March 2nd. That's the date that's been selected. So I know a lot of people asking if there's going to be an extension. That's happened in the past. As of right now, the date is March 2nd. So get those orders in. One thing I did want to mention is the last few weeks I've talked about a really cool Kickstarter called Action Figure Adventure that I had backed personally. I was really excited for it. Four Horsemen Studios is going to be featured in that. That did get funded last week. It met all of its stretch goals. It got over the $10,000 hump was where they wanted to get over to include an extra episode in the series. So thank you very much to everyone that backed that. I say thank you. I have no stake in that. I just think it's really cool, and I'm excited to see it get made. So that's very cool as well. We did just post on the Four Horsemen's website a couple cool things that are going on. Number one, they will be at MuskeeCon at the end of March in Michigan. So they'll be out there hanging out with the guys from Legions Cast. I believe Cornboy and Jim are going to be going out for that. The news is on the website already, and if you're on the newsletter, they sent something out about that. They're also doing something very cool this weekend at the International Toy Fair in New York. They've partnered with BB Props and with I think it's called Magic Wheelchair to do something. They haven't announced really what that is just yet, but stay tuned for that. Keep your eyes open this weekend. I mean, obviously with Toy Fair, as toy collectors, I'm sure a lot of us are going to be excitedly looking at the news websites to see what stuff's getting revealed. But keep your eyes on what they're going to reveal, what the Horsemen are going to reveal. I'm sure it's going to be something special. Actually, kind of funny little aside, speaking of, Toy Fair reveals, a lot of people know that in addition to Mythic Legions, I am a longtime G.I. Joe fan. I don't have a big G.I. Joe collection or anything. I played with them when I was a kid, along with Masters of the Universe and Transformers and Star Wars and so forth. But I do like the G.I. Joe characters. I've always been into those. So a couple months ago, I had done some 6-inch custom G.I. Joes, like really kind of like what you would expect from Hasbro, not Mythic Legion style. I then went back and did some Mythic Legions figures that were inspired by G.I. Joe as well. So like I said, if you're a toy fan, you probably saw this week that Hasbro finally showed, or it leaked perhaps, some photos of their first 6-inch G.I. Joe Snake Eyes. And it was hysterical because the amount of people that reached out to me and personally sent me that were like, did you see this? Did you see this? It was so cool. It was really, it made me very happy that I've made connections and that people saw that and instantly thought of me and wanted to share their excitement with me. So thank you to everyone that shared those pictures of Snake Eyes with me. I am very excited as well. And hopefully we'll see more at Toy Fair this weekend. Nate's saying he can't wait for MesquiCon. Yeah, that's going to be awesome. I was actually looking into flights to MesquiCon myself. I was strongly considering going out there and spending the weekend in Michigan with those guys. Still considering it. It would be, I've wanted to get out to Michigan to hang out with the podcast crew, and to be out there for a show that Pete's putting on. I'd love to be able to go support Pete. And obviously the fact that the studio is going to be out there, I'd love to be a part of that. So we'll see. What else do we have going? One very, very special thing. One of, my people that tune in every single week that comments, that really seems to enjoy the show. It's become a little bit of a family affair for him at home. This is my buddy, Anthony. You probably saw, if you're on the Cabal, which you are obviously, because this is exclusive to the Cabal. But he had, some family challenges. His young son had to go to the hospital this past week. Anthony watches the show with his son. His son falls asleep actually listening to me talk about Mythic Legions, which is funny. Anthony jokingly calls it, like bedtime, Mythic bedtime with Uncle Jeremy. But his young son was in the hospital. He had some surgery, didn't think he was going to be out in time for this week's broadcast, but he made it home today. He's, watching now. So I just wanted to send, my personal best wishes out there to Tony. I hope you're doing a lot better. Thank you for joining every single week, and especially this week, buddy. We're happy to have you here, man. Steve's saying he'd love to have me out in Michigan. I know, Steve. Like I said, if I don't make it out for MesquiCon, I'm definitely going to plan like a weekend trip to come hang out with you guys. I was actually talking to Travis about it, kind of wondering if MesquiCon was the best time to go because it's going to be so busy. Everyone has so many responsibilities. We'll see. I'm still considering it, looking at flights. So don't really have much, like I said, more in the way of news. So I think we can turn right to the topic at hand. And like I said, as we're talking about this stuff, feel free to ask questions. I'll do my best to respond. So last week, like I said, we started talking about the topic of adding, heads, custom heads to your Mythic Legions figures to change the look up a bit. One of the things I talked about is one of the great strengths of Mythic Legions is how much they've been able to get out of their parts library But at the end of the day, they are reusing a lot of these same parts. You know, there's only so many heads that are in the line, and it's incredible the variety we've been able to get out of that. But the addition of custom heads has definitely added a lot to the hobby for many fans, and certainly for customizers like myself. And ultimately, adding a head to an existing figure is the easiest way that you can change the look of them, and it's a great gateway into other customizing projects. So last week when I first talked about this topic, we said there are really two kinds of heads you're going to add. You're either going to add heads from existing toy lines, or you're going to add totally custom heads, many of which were actually created specifically for Mythic Legions. Last week we covered all of those other toy lines. We looked at Masters of the Universe, Marvel Legends, Warcraft, and a number of other far more obscure toy lines. Tonight we're going to talk about these custom heads, and you see a bunch of them laid out, you know, on my tables here. Really, when you're talking about custom heads, I think that there's two different categories that you'll be looking at and that we're going to cover tonight. You're either looking at heads that are like custom sculpted, likely using traditional, you know, physical methods, clay or what have you, and then they're cast. Sometimes they're so painted, sometimes not. That's one kind, and then the other kind is going to be 3D printed, and that's obviously what a lot of Mythic Legions customizers are using today. The work that MyActionFigureCustoms is doing has made an incredible impact on the Mythic Legions customizing hobby. So we're going to talk at length about 3D printing as well. And I'm going to show you a lot of these different pieces. I'm going to talk to you about kind of some of my thoughts on which ones work best, you know, how you can get your hands on some and so forth. So with that, let's see what people are talking about, and we'll get started. Steve says, don't stay at Travis's no matter how much he begs. Travis told me today he wants me to move to Michigan. So he wants me to actually come and be close to him all the time. So when I first started customizing Mythic Legions, as I said last week, the first heads that I started adding was Masters of the Universe, and then other toy lines. But when I started looking at custom heads, the first heads that I found were by an artist named Jim Pansen Creations. That was the name of the company, which I found out afterwards. The guy behind it is not named Jim Pansen. His name's actually Kevin. I thought for a while his name was Jim Pansen, but no, that's not it at all. Kevin's in Germany, great sculptor. Actually was a big Motu collector, and he for years did kind of like add-on kits, not just heads, but other little pieces that were intended to go on to very specific Motu bodies to make certain characters. Really cool work. He started when Mythic Legions came out, he made the jump and he started doing Mythic Legions as well. And I remember seeing some of his first pieces, and one of the things that he did early on, the first couple pieces he did a dwarf and he did an orc. And that was really cool because in the early Mythic Legions line, we had a number of dwarves, but we only had two that actually had exposed faces. You know, we had Thord Ironjaw, and then we had Jorin Runeshaper. All of the other dwarves either had the half helmet with the beard, kind of like what we got on the Barbarian Builder and on Balthor Shadowhorn, or they had the full dwarf helmet like you got on Orange Steelhide and on the Legion Builders. Great heads. Those are excellent pieces. But as you started building out the dwarf army, you know, you had a lot of repeats there. So the fact that he added another dwarf into the mix, that was super cool. Same thing with orcs. The fact that he added another head that we could pop on the orcs, that was really neat. A couple pieces I have here from Kevin. So this was one of the orcs he did early on. I think he called this Borug. Really cool looking, you know, very different looking orc. One thing I will point out, by the way, I'm working on different ways to show these to you. I've got some different software that I'm messing around with, but I know that these don't show great during the live broadcast. So what I did last week and what I'm going to do again this week is after I'm done, I've already got photos of all of these. I've shared all of these before on my Instagram, on my website. So I've got some photos that I will post on the Cabal once the broadcast is done, so you can go and see better, more detailed photos of these. But this was an example, and he fully painted these. These are, what he sculpted these using traditional methods, and then he actually cast them and painted them, and they fit on perfectly. You don't need the blue tack or anything. I don't need to Dremel them to make them bigger. They snap on. The feel of them, they actually feel a lot like Mythic Legions production pieces. And one of the things that Kevin does really well, and the next gentleman I'm going to talk to also, is they're such expert painters that they look at the factory paint apps and they understand how these things are painted at the factory, and they try as much as possible to replicate those paint jobs, or at least that process. So these look very much like factory pieces. They fit really, really well. When Kevin would post stuff for sale, he would generally either post like one piece at a time or a couple pieces. This zombie he did here was one that he posted as part of, he called it like the Dead Pack. And it was a couple skeleton-like heads. This was one that I thought was really cool because this was long before Hagman came out, so there wasn't a zombie-like character, and I thought it worked really well putting it on some skeletal type, limbs to make like an actual traditional-looking zombie. Now, one of the bummers with Kevin's work is about a year ago he stopped offering pieces for sale directly, because of the rise in shipping prices from Germany to like the United States. It got to be so cost prohibitive for him to actually send out heads to the US that he said, look, he's already charging, say, $35 for a painted head. It's going to cost just as much in shipping. It makes no sense to do it. So he actually regrettably said, you know what, no more. I'm just going to make them for myself. I'm not going to be selling these anymore. Luckily, that changed a few months back, and we're going to get to that. I'm going to talk more about Kevin in a little while, but those are some of the earliest pieces that I got that were other customizers, creating heads specifically for Mythic Legions. Now, after Kevin and after Jim Pansen Creations, the next pieces that I saw that totally blew me away, and I've already talked about this gentleman on the show, was a guy named Matt O'Toole. So Matt O'Toole posts under the moniker of Castle of Power. If you've watched my other broadcasts, the first week that I did this, I showed a pirate goblin, a sea goblin, I called them. And it was a blue head that had actually been created for a Motu Unnamed One figure that Matt had done many years ago. Like Kevin, Matt came at this as an old Motu collector. He started doing, heads for Motu figures. Specifically, we actually did a customizing corner feature on Matt on sourcehorseman.com that you can go check out. And one of the things he talked about is, he wanted to create certain Motu characters that weren't going to get made in the classics line. Like he wanted to do like some Remco figures and the Warlord and stuff. So that's what got him started. And like Kevin, when Mythic Legions came out, he jumped on board and he started producing heads for that line as well. Matt's heads, they're very hard to come by. He's a super busy guy. He actually works in the special effects industry. He's worked on like The Hobbit and Harry Potter, bunch of cool stuff. I believe he works on like NCIS New Orleans now, doing makeup and everything. So busy guy. He's got a lot of stuff to do. This is something he does on the side as a hobby. So as such, he's not producing these in like the quantities that say like a MyActionFigureCustoms are. So he does post them here. People ask me all the time when they see me use pieces from Matt, where can I get some? Where do I acquire those? He posts them on Facebook when they're available. That's about it. If you see someone ever selling one, jump on it because they're well worth the price you're going to pay. Matt really loves dwarves. So Matt does a ton of sculpts that are different dwarf characters, which a lot of Mythic fans seem to really be into dwarves and they want the unique heads. So it, really a good addition to the line. This is one, speaking of the pirates, I talked about my goblin pirate. I also did, this is one that he had done, and I'd seen this head he had posted some samples of this head on his Facebook page, and I liked it so much that I reached out to him and said, hey, if that's ever available, let me know. It took me over a year for him actually to have one available that I was able to jump on and grab that. Super expressive. Not only are Matt's paints great, and he also, when he does sell them, he does occasionally sell them unpainted or painted. Even though I'm a painter and I can do this stuff, his paints are so phenomenal. And as I've said before, long before I was a toy customizer, I was a toy collector, and I'm still obviously a toy collector. So I just like cool toys. These are cool pieces of art to me. To get some of his work, very, very exciting. This is another dwarf that he did. I use this to make kind of like my dwarven thief. And again, I'll show better pictures of all of these later on the Cabal. And these are some of the stuff I'm showing, they go beyond just popping a head on a figure. There's a lot of other stuff that was done here. This particular figure started as a King Brom de Mayan jaw. I added some brown dry brushing to him to give his armor a little bit more of a leather look. I added, this pouch here and these, bottles and everything to really kind of bring out the character. I added this cape that came from a WWE figure. So I definitely have done a lot more to this figure than just pop a head on. But even if you're just starting with heads, that first orc I showed, this is just an Urgo figure with a whole bunch of belts and that head on it and a couple different weapons. So you don't need necessarily to go all out. You certainly can, and I think that adds a lot to the character. But even just popping heads on these is a great, great place to start. Now, Matt, we're talking about Matt right now. Matt just joined. Nice to have you, Matt. We're actually talking about some of your pieces. One of the cool things that Matt has started doing now as well is not only is he doing, custom dwarves and custom heads for the regular size line, but Matt has also made the leap to the bigger size, and he started doing some ogre heads as well, which is great because the ogres, I got to tell you, I love the trolls. The trolls are just wonderful pieces, but the trolls were never meant to be as modular and as customizable as the regular line is. So I've gotten my trolls and they're in my display. The only custom I've ever done on a troll was taking some like plastic bones from a Halloween decoration and creating kind of like a bone armor type troll. And I did one, I actually put it on a stone troll a while back, and then before Legions Con last year, I swapped it onto an ice troll, and I loved the way it looked. So I brought that to display at the show. But outside of that, I haven't done any troll customs. When the ogres came out, they are made very modular. They do lend themselves to customization. So that's been, something I've been seeing a lot of a lot of ogre customs on the groups and on Instagram. So that's great to see. And Matt has done that as well. This particular one here is one I did as part of my Mythic Shogun series. So we looked at that a few weeks ago when I showed you some of my samurai Mythic Legions that I had done that combine Mythic Legions with articulated icons armor. Well, this was the big beast that I did for that wave. This was my samurai ogre that uses weapons and armor actually from like 12-inch scale figures from, was that 1/6 scale? 1/6 scale weapons and armor work great with ogres. I'm going to do a whole show just about accessories that you can use on ogres. You can see a couple of them here, these giant wicked blades, but this head that Matt did adds so much to this character. And again, wonderful paints, wonderful sculpt. The only bad side with Matt's stuff is, like I said, availability. It's really, really hard to come by. So once again, if you ever find one, if anyone's ever selling it, jump on that. That sea goblin I showed you, I bought that head literally within the last couple weeks. Someone was selling that in one of the Mythic Legions groups. So as hard to find as these things may be, they do come up for sale every now and again. Now, another early customizer that started doing this, and this is going back actually to the Four Horsemen message board, where a gentleman that I met there named Eric, who's better known as Zombie 13. So Zombie is someone who I struck up a friendship with, and he was doing some custom sculpts as well. And one of the things I loved about what Zombie was doing was, as much as I loved Kevin and Matt's pieces, they were doing like orcs and dwarves, and that filled a gap for me because I wanted more unique heads for orcs and more unique heads for dwarves. But what Zombie started doing was creating heads for races and character types that didn't yet exist at all in Mythic Legions. So that really scratched another itch for me. Because I approach this line with such a nostalgic love of Dungeons and Dragons, when I start customizing, some of the stuff I want to do is create races and character classes and all kinds of stuff that I remember from that world of Dungeons and Dragons, but may not yet have representation in the realm of mythos. So some of the stuff that he did early on that I loved, he did a set around Halloween one year of these like pumpkin heads, right? I think he called them Jack, actually. But I put these, this is actually on an Ilgar body, because the Ilgar body, those bones, which are made to look dirty, like they've just crawled out of the grave, they also kind of look like wood to me. So I created this character, and it's a race that I call Twig Blights. And I say I call them. A Twig Blight is an actual race in Dungeons and Dragons. And that's what this represented to me. I saw those heads, and he actually did a couple different pumpkin heads. I have 2 of them that I did, but these are custom sculpted by him. So he actually creates these. He created these, I should say, with traditional sculpting methods, and then he cast them and once again painted them, expert paints as well. This was something I really liked. And then he did this, which this one absolutely blew me away. This is a popular one here. So he called it, he couldn't call it what we all want to call it for legal reasons. This looks very much obviously like a classic Dungeons and Dragons monster type called the Mind Flayer. He did this right around the time that Stranger Things was coming out, and one of the monsters was called the Mind Flayer. So I have to imagine they were particularly sensitive about that, that copyright. He called this a cephalad, but he did it in a number of different colors. I think traditionally it was green. I actually reached out to him and asked him specifically to do it in blue for me because I wanted to put it on a Keltis body. This is the way that I really imagined it, and I absolutely love this piece. And this is something that he sold at the time directly on the Four Horsemen messaging forum. Now, like Kevin before him, Zombie kind of hit a wall, and doing these pieces the traditional method, actually sculpting them and casting them and trying to sell them himself, that proved to be a bit too much work. So like Kevin, Zombie's actually found new life for his customizing and painting, working with MyActionFigureCustoms. Now I'm going to cover MyActionFigureCustoms and 3D printing in length in a little bit, so I'm going to come back to both Kevin and Zombie. But those pieces that I just showed, they're no longer available. The Mind Flayer-like head, the pumpkin head, those are no longer available. They did redo the pumpkin heads through MyActionFigureCustoms. They have not yet done the cephalad heads. I'm not sure if they're going to. I believe they were pretty popular, so you could certainly see those in the future. But we're going to talk a little bit more about both of them and what they're doing now, because they haven't left the world of producing these things for us. They've just kind of shifted mediums a little bit. Walter, nice to see you, man. Nice to see you that you've joined as well. Matt is saying he loves Zombie 13. They go back to the early Froosh days. Yeah, very cool. It's amazing when you meet people when you start in this hobby. I've met people. One of my first kind of collecting groups that I was on was the old Spawn.com message boards. So I've said that I've been following Four Horsemen Studios since back in their McFarlane Toys days. And I was a huge Spawn collector. Spawn's actually probably the line that most got me into collecting again. So I remember those old Spawn.com boards, and I will routinely run into people in the Cabal and through Mythic Legions in some way that are like, hey, I remember you from the Spawn board. And it's great to have those connections and to kind of reminisce about that. So you're talking about back in the Froosh days. That's awesome. Travis, nice to have you here. Talked about you earlier and how you're trying to get me to move to Michigan. Not considering moving, but definitely considering visiting. So Another customizer that I think is an interesting one to talk about is a gentleman that I discovered here on Facebook through a fellow collector named Eddie Salvatore. So you're probably familiar with Eddie. Eddie is a huge fan of the dwarves, gigantic dwarf collection. Actually, we have a feature on Eddie and his dwarf collection coming soon on sourcehorseman.com. So, prepare to check that out. That's going to be really cool. But Eddie, in his attempt to create new dwarf heads to finish building out his army, continue building out his army, he started commissioning some custom heads from an artist whose name was Avanis Hart. He posts on Facebook and sells on eBay under the name, and his name is weird, so I'm going to do my best to say it, but it's like LuvNidleness Customs. It's a really weird name. Again, his name is Avanis Hart. Really nice guy, and he was taking commission work. I know I've seen a number of people that have commissioned him to do actually heads of themselves. I saw some of the early stuff that he did for Eddie. To be honest, some of his work I didn't care for. Some of it I was like, yeah, that doesn't fit what I want. But then there were some that I loved. Some of the dwarf heads that Eddie commissioned I really thought were great. I bought them right from Avanis. He painted them for me. And then when I reached out to him, I was working on my Star Wars Bounty Hunter series. And, I had started with the Boba Fett, which I've, shown many times before, but I was trying to do the others in that line, the other bounty hunters, and I was really stuck finding heads for Dengar and for Forlom. So Dengar, I knew I wanted him to look like a wounded knight. I wanted him to have all bandages wrapped around his head, and I just couldn't find a head that did that. The closest I could find was actually Darkman, like the old Liam Neeson type character, but the only figure I could find wasn't the right scale. So I ended up actually commissioning Avanis to do a couple heads for me, including the Dengar one and the Forlom. And, he actually didn't he charged like $35 to actually not only custom, cast it and paint it, but also to do the sculpture for me as well. Now, let's be honest, I can tell you this is not sculpted from scratch. I sent him an idea. I actually sent him a picture of Darkman that I thought I wanted to look. I didn't want Dengar's face to be open. I wanted it to be all wrapped like a wounded knight. I can tell that he actually took an existing head and sculpted the bandages over it, which I'm fine with. I had no problem with that at all. It looks exactly like I wanted it, but like I said, exactly what I needed, great price. This is one, he actually was selling these for a while as well. And he sells a bunch of stuff now still on eBay. But when it came time to do the Forlom, I kind of tried to reimagine these characters in some ways. So when I was thinking of Forlom, this is like the insect looking like droid bounty hunter. I wanted to go the insect route, but I was trying to think how I could represent it in Mythic Legions. And I was looking at some old D&D races, and there's a race called the Thrycreen. It's a insectoid race. They have 4 arms. And I love that. I said, oh, wait a minute. They have 4 arms, and I'm trying to create a character of Forlom. So that connection for me, Forlom, 4 arms, that's why I went in this direction. But I couldn't find a head, which is funny because when I showed this at Legions Con, everyone who came by, including Corn Boy, thought it was the Mezco Gomez head. They were like, oh, is that Gomez? Is that like a Mythic Legions Gomez? And I guess it kind of works as that as well. I had this done before the Mezco 112 Gomez heads came out. Because had I not, I probably would have used that Gomez head. That would have been the way I went. But Avanis sculpted this from scratch. And I know that because I actually saw some of the sculpture work that he was doing. He showed me the rough sculpture as he was working through it. But then again, this worked really, really well for the character I wanted. I sent him the product art, and these are all sculpted, cast, and he paints them. And a number of these are still available on eBay. So this was different for me because all of these other ones were artists who had created something that they wanted to put out. And then I got lucky enough to grab some for my own display, my own collection. Both of those that I just showed were actually ones that I commissioned specifically to create characters that I was working on. So interesting little change there. I'm going to check out some of the questions we have here before I continue on. I've got a bunch more stuff to show. Continue the conversation. Eric saying, took your recommendation and ordered Shadowrun Silver Max. That's awesome. Yeah, that's a cool figure. That's actually one that I ironically used all of. I broke it apart and I used different body parts in different ways for some of my other dwarves as well. Sometimes I buy one of these obscure figures and I just use a weapon or a head or something, and the rest ends up going in a fodder pile that, you know, I may never get to, but that one worked really, really well for me. Let's see, a bunch of people saying hello to each other. Nice to have you all here. Thank you once again for joining. Matt saying, when I was talking about Eddie, Matt saying Eddie has a lot of his heads. Yes, Eddie has done very, very well outfitting his dwarf army with a bunch of those Castle of Power heads. Jason, hi, nice to see you. Caleb, Luis. So I was talking about Evanis Hart, LuvNidleness Customs, selling stuff on eBay. The next two pieces I want to show you are definitely stuff that where eBay is going to come into play. Now, we're going to start shifting. So a lot of the stuff that I already showed you, unfortunately, it's stuff you're not going to be able to get your hands on. You're not going to be able to get some of these old Kevin pieces or Matt's pieces. You know, the stuff from Zombie 13, that when he was casting them, those are pieces that I've had in my collection for a very long time. They're not available anymore. So if you're watching this and saying, well, this is cool, but this doesn't help me because I want some custom heads, pretty much everything else I'm going to show is fairly readily available now. And I'm going to talk about where you can find that. So starting with eBay. So when you look up, you know, Mythic Legions custom heads on eBay, you're going to find two different sellers predominantly. One of them is, his eBay username is G.I. Joe Eben, E-B-E-N. He also goes by Big Head Studios. So this is a guy who does a couple different things. He's not just Mythic Legions. He definitely casts heads for other toy lines as well. And then he does some custom heads. Frankly, I'm not 100% sure, you know, where he, like, if he's the one sculpting them originally or not. But I've definitely used some of his pieces before. So two different things you're going to find that he does. One thing that he does is you're going to see specifically orcs. You're going to see orcs that are clearly Mythic Legions orcs, but it had different things added to them. And let's take a step back for a second, because this is actually a subject of some debate. This is an example of one. So this is an orc that's had kind of a long beard and some hair added to him. But if you look at that facial structure, this is clearly like the Mythic Legions Urzok head. That started out as that. So I've heard a lot of people ask questions about, like, is it okay to do this? And I'm not speaking in the capacity of the studio at all right now. I am just relating what I have heard Cornboy and the studio say before. And that is definitively, if you are taking any of their heads or any of their pieces and casting them and selling them, that is not allowed. That is not acceptable. If they see you doing that, they are very firmly and politely going to ask you to stop. So that is not, you cannot do that. However, if you take one of their heads as a starting point and you significantly add to it, they've seemed to be okay with that. I know they've seen a lot of this stuff. They've seen a lot of my stuff they use. I haven't bought these in a while. These are some of the early pieces that I saw people doing, using these kind of custom orc heads. But if you're looking to get into this, they're available fairly cheaply. He sells them unpainted for like $10. So it's a great way to get started. But that's what he did. He took an orc head and he sculpted some extra pieces onto it. I have another one here that is like a wounded orc that's got a bandage over his eye. This is actually one I really like because the bandage it's got like some grit to it. I honestly think he probably used medical tape and put it on the head and cast it that way, because there's definitely, I mean, it feels like real, what you'd expect that medical tape texture to have. And I really, really like that one. That's always been one of my favorites. Again, better pictures of all of these will be shared. So if you look those up, you will see the seller selling those heads. If you ever see heads being offered that don't have obvious, alterations added to them, I would suggest, don't buy those. That is something that is not cool. That is taking, stuff away from the studio. Things like that. Like I said, the Horseman they've seemed to be okay with that in the past. But this guy, G.I. Joe Eben, he also does other stuff as well. So I said he doesn't only do Mythic Legions. I've used a number of his heads that were for Marvel Legends, actually, for Mythic Legions figures. So this was a head that was meant to be a John Byrne Beast. I think it was meant to go on like the blue Beast body. You repaint this and you gave it a different John Byrne look. But that grin, it looked so much like a mischievous, like Puck, like Faye. I was watching, if you've seen the Amazon show Carnival Row, I was watching Carnival Row when I saw this head, and I was all about, fairies and pucks and things like that. So I saw that instantly, was like, oh, I can totally make that into some weird mischievous Puck character. So that's what I did here. But that wasn't meant to be for Mythic Legions. That was for Marvel Legends. There's also another one. He's got a couple Nightcrawler heads that I think work really, really well as Shadow Elves. I don't have one on my table, but I've painted those up and used those as Shadow Elves. I like that a lot. And then the last things that I've seen him do are heads that I don't know where this comes from. I have to assume this is a custom head. So this is a goblin, and that little piece comes off. I believe he actually debuted this goblin with this head at PowerCon last year. He was selling them there. My little goblin shaman here, but he's done a number of different goblins. I actually follow, like I said, G.I. Joe Eben is the name on eBay. Big Head Studios is what they post here on Facebook as, and what I see them on Instagram as well. If you follow them, they recently just showed a whole bunch of other goblin heads that they're going to be coming up with, lots of different expressions. So if you're really into the goblins, that's another place to look. Again, they're fairly affordable. These heads are like $10 or so. They're not. So if you want to get started, a lot of the custom painted heads that I showed early on, those are going to run you, when they were available, $35 or so. And they're great because all the work's done. But if you want to get started with some simple paints, some of these heads that I'm mentioning on eBay are a great place to start. So the last person I'm going to talk about is another seller you're going to find on eBay. And he's also here in the Cabal as well. I'm sure many of you have seen his work. His name is Kurt Daniels. So he sells on eBay as Camarodude. You probably know him because he's the guy that buys like waves of Mythic Legions and parts them out. He breaks them up and he sells the individual pieces, which has been obviously very well received by a lot of customizers. If they're just looking for a certain weapon, or they just need a new pair of arms for a custom they have in mind, instead of having to buy a whole new figure, being able to go onto eBay, look at Camarodude's auctions and just buy the pieces they want has definitely been helpful for a lot of customizers. Well, what Kurt also does is he sells cast heads. Now, I generally don't like buying heads that are just straight recasts of other toys. I said last week that whenever possible, if I want a Motu head, I'm going to try to buy a loose version of that Motu head rather than a cast of it. It's just an ethical thing that I try to do. I make an exception with Kurt's stuff. And the reason is, when I buy Kurt's stuff, I don't think I'm buying a cast head. I'm buying a paint job. Kurt is a wonderful, wonderful painter. And he sells painted heads for like $20. So it's almost like he's giving you the cast and he's charging you for the paint job. Wonderful, wonderful work. Lots of different pieces. A lot of people take his heads and put them on Templar bodies or put them on Knight bodies to really flesh out and add some variety to those pieces. Two pieces I'm going to show from Kurt that I absolutely love. This is probably my favorite piece I have from him. So this is a character I call Marzocco, the Winter King. So I created this people ask me all the time where I get my ideas, how I get inspired. I get inspired by everything. Things I read, things I see, things I remember from my childhood, you name it. But this particular character was inspired by a book series I read called The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. Wonderful, wonderful series, which was actually inspired by Russian folklore and a lot of fairy tales, Russian fairy tales. The character of Morzoko, the Winter King, it's a fae type character in the books from Russian folklore. So I saw this head, and he had offered it in a couple different versions with black hair, with brown hair, and he had one with white hair. And I specifically said, hey, can you do one for me? A lot of times it's got like a 5 o'clock shadow. I said, I don't want any facial hair, and I want black eyes, because that's kind of how he's described in the books. So I got this, and it's when you look at when you see the pictures I post later, it is such a wonderful, wonderful head. And I got it, and I just said to him, where did this come from? This is such a great sculpt. I could not place it. And it's funny, it's actually a WWE Sting figure. So it was actually from that series that I talk about quite often, the Create a Superstar series. I had this head. I legitimately had this head in my fodder bins, and I got this, and it was so nice, I didn't even recognize it. And it's because that Sting head is what you'd expect from a mass-produced, mass-market toy line that's meant to go in Targets and Walmarts. Great sculpture, but the paint job didn't do it any favors. You know, not a lot of detail. Certainly not what you're going to get by someone hand painting these. So Kurt's work on hand painting these absolutely just blew me away. And so whenever I see Kurt's work, and I have a number of pieces he's done, he's actually got a couple pieces that he's painting for me right now. I'll talk about that in a moment. I always imagine that I'm buying the paint job from Kurt, and the head that he's putting it on, that's just coming kind of freebie. This next piece I actually posted on Instagram right before this broadcast. Like I said, I want to share all these pictures afterwards, and I realized I didn't have any pictures of her. So I went out and snapped a picture, and I really liked it. So I posted on Instagram. But this is the first female that I've shown today. That's one of the things that I certainly find in these custom heads, is that there's not a lot of customizers doing females. I don't know, for whatever reason, you know, a lot of people do what they want for their own collections, and they end up selling, you know, casts of them or, you know, 3D prints of them. So I don't know, maybe a lot of people just are not really looking to do a lot of females. I just dropped your helmet, I'll get that after. But this is one, it's actually a cast of I believe this is a 112 Catwoman, but obviously painted very different. It's got red hair. You can't see it on the video, you'll see it on the picture. A lot of freckles and stuff. And this is an example of just a custom head slapped onto a body. This is the Faustina body. Just slapped that head right on. The helmet that I dropped is the helmet she came with. I cradled that under her arm. And it's such a great paint job, such a great expressive head that adds another female warrior to my display. One of the cool things with Kurt is not only can you get these loose Mythic Legions parts from him, can you get these really expertly painted heads, but he takes commissions for paintings. So this is a question I see asked all the time in the groups is, I want to buy some MyActionFigureCustoms unpainted heads, but I'm not comfortable painting them. Is there anyone here that will do that for me, that will take that commission? Kurt is one person that is willing to do that. It's funny, I was actually chatting with Kurt right before tonight's broadcast about some heads that he's painting for me on commission. And I asked him, I said, hey, I know you're doing those for me. And because I dealt with Kurt many times before, I've got a lot of stuff from him. I said, you're not just doing this for me, right? Like, you do take commissions? Because I know people ask me, and I'm about to go on a broadcast, and I'd like to let them know that. And he said, absolutely, I would be happy to take commissions. They can find me in the Cabal, reach out to me. Kurt Daniels is his name. He's definitely someone willing to take these painting commissions. And one cool thing that Kurt's doing is he wants to get away from from these casts, taking other heads, casting them, and repainting them. While he does great work, and like I said, they look so different than what they started out as. you know, he really wants to get into his own designs, his own heads. So he's actually working on some cool stuff now to do just that, to have some completely, he started doing some digital sculpting, trying to teach himself that so he can actually put out some heads that are uniquely his intellectual property, and kind of break away from strictly casting other people's stuff. So let's see what we got. Anyone asking? Freckles. So actually, William Robert Post, who from MyActionFigureCustoms, he's here, and great timing. I'm about to actually talk about you. He says a lot of sculptors do not feel comfortable doing female sculpts. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, maybe that could actually lead to it. I mean, I have to imagine that, you know, the helmets and stuff, those are going to be a lot easier to do than, you know, human faces and, you know, monstrous type faces, goblins and orcs. Those are probably going to be a little easier to do than human faces. And, you know, the female form, female faces, I can imagine people having a hard time with that. So interesting insight. Thank you. Oh, Travis. So I just talked about a number of different artists that create these cast heads, whether they're sculpting them from scratch and casting them, whether they're starting with other heads and adding on to them, or just casting them straight up and repainting them. Those are all things we've covered. But when it comes to Mythic Legions customizing and adding new heads to them, the 3D printing world is really where a lot of people are at today. And before I show some of that stuff, I know someone earlier said, hey, what's that Cthulhu looking guy back there? Are we going to see him? Absolutely. That's my drowned ogre. We'll talk about him in just a moment because he is from MyActionFigureCustoms. And they're obviously, you know, the 800-pound gorilla when it comes to Mythic Legions heads, specifically 3D printed ones. But 3D printing, I've kind of had an interesting relationship with it where my first exposure to 3D printing was through Shapeways. And I'm going to talk more about Shapeways in a minute as well. But the first time I looked at Shapeways, I stumbled on a user account, a seller account called Stranger Than Fiction. And wonderfully cool looking stuff, incredible weapons. I absolutely love the design of them. I ended up ordering a few pieces. I was actually looking for a sword for a very specific custom I had in mind, and I couldn't find any existing toy line that had something similar. I found one in Stranger Than Fiction's Shapeways shop, so I ordered that. And when you order on Shapeways, they have different quality of materials you can use. Lower qualities, cheaper price, obviously. I always, whenever I've ordered from Shapeways, I've always ordered the highest quality possible. But when I got those first swords in, I was so disappointed in the quality. The sculpture itself looked great, but the material, I was not what I was expecting. And this was a point where I already had these other custom heads from, you know, Matt and from Kevin and so from Zombie and so forth. So I was almost expecting that kind of quality, that kind of smoothness, and that's clearly not what I got. It ended up working okay because they were swords, so I could kind of fudge that. You know what? They're probably they were a little grittier. You know, they've seen some battle. That didn't bother me. I was able to get away with that. But what I didn't feel I could do was buy heads from Shapeways and throw those on my figures. Nate, nice to see you. Thanks for joining. These heads that I've shown that I talked about earlier, the reason I think they look so great on customs is because, as I said, they feel like factory pieces. They look like factory pieces. You feel them, the smoothness of them. They blend in with the rest of the body. When I looked at those 3D printed swords, they didn't have that same kind of feel. And it felt to me that if I threw a head of that material on the body, it was going to be even worse. So that was my first impression of 3D printing. And I was just like, not for me, not going to do that. And then I went to Four Horsemen Studios in 2018 for their Intern for a Day event. And one of the things that they did was they gave all of us some cool little giveaways, some cool little freebies. And one of them was like this little jawbone weapon that one of their guest sculptors, Ben has done a lot of the weapon sculpting. he actually did one specifically for the Intern for a Day event, and they printed them on their printers there, and they gave them all to us. And I was blown away because it didn't have that gritty feel. It was a different kind of a printer. The feel of it actually felt like what I'd expect from these type of toys. And lo and behold, one thing I learned at the Intern for a Day event was that Four Horsemen Studios do all of their sculpting digitally now. And they actually print the prototypes on those 3D printers. So all these photos that we're seeing, these are 3D printed. They had 3D printed parts there for ogres long before they actually got released. You know, we saw the disassembled ogre pieces there, and they were all 3D printed. So that made me start to think, you know what? Maybe this 3D printing, there's clearly other materials, there's clearly other ways to do it. And shortly after that is when Rob started doing MyActionFigureCustoms. And I can distinctly remember Rob starting, you know, before his first sale. I had a lengthy phone conversation, just kind of, you know, talking with him. He was just talking about some of his ideas. He was talking to customizers like myself just to get some opinions. You know, if you check out the My Wife Is Going to Kill Me podcast, there's an interview with Rob on there where he talks about why he started MyActionFigureCustoms. I won't reiterate all of that, but the bottom line was he started it because he was a fan and he wanted pieces for himself. So once he started getting these pieces, and I think he said that the first pieces he did, he wanted to create like a barbarian horde, like a barbarian ravager horde or something. So he did a bunch of like barbarian, like helmeted pieces, and eventually decided to sell them. The first sale I can distinctly remember, you know, the pieces that were in there, very barbarian, like a really wicked looking knight helmet. And I'll be honest with you, that first sale, I wasn't a big fan of the pieces that were offered. I didn't really have ideas for them, but I ordered them specifically to support him because I liked what he was doing. I wanted to support him. Those pieces came in and I did a 180. I was so blown away. The quality was so much better than I expected. And the pieces themselves, the minute I got them, I started having ideas. I can use it like this. I can use it like this. Totally made a believer out of me after that first sale. I can't say enough. I loved the quality, loved what he was doing very early on. And now a lot of us have seen that as well. A lot of us have bought a number of his pieces. One of the cool things with his pieces are he releases such variety that if you don't like everything, you can pick and choose the pieces that you do want. That's what I do. There's definitely some stuff that gets released that I don't have ideas for, so I end up passing that for other stuff. But it lends itself to so much creativity. I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment about my action figure custom sales and some of my tips for you so you can get what you want out of it. But let me show a few pieces first. So I talked earlier about Kevin and Zombie 13 no longer doing this stuff on their own. They're working with Rob at My Action Figure Customs now. So Kevin is actually working as one of his sculptors. He's got a number of sculptors that contribute pieces, which is cool too, because they kind of have different styles. So you can start to see his pieces and you can see that, you know, this is Arlen's style, this is Lee's style, this is Kevin's style. So you can start to see that. It's really cool, GD's style. I like that a lot because it adds some variety to the line as well and to his offerings. So Kevin started doing that. This is one piece that he did that I have. This goblin chef kind of guy is going to pot on his head. You know, a lot of people, as soon as they saw this sculpt, I think they had the same thought that I did. Oh, I'm going to make him a goblin chef. So it was a pretty easy, it was a very obvious way to go with this head, but you know, once I had it, I couldn't see him as anything other than a chef. But this is cool because this is something that Kevin had sculpted digitally. I remember him showing it here on the Cabal, but this was a point where he wasn't going to be offering pieces for sale anymore. As I said, the shipping rates from Germany to the US had become so exorbitant that he said, I can't do it. Now that he's able to do these digital sculpts and work with My Action Figure Customs to actually print and fulfill it, that's wonderful. That's a really, really cool thing. And it allows us as Mythic Legions fans to get more of Kevin's work, even with those restrictions that, you know, he was able to get past those shipping restrictions by working with Rob. I missed a comment earlier. Someone, Johnny, asked, they sell full figures. No, nothing. Actually, there's one figure here that was sold full. I'll show in a minute. But all of these are just heads that I've added on to my figures. All the customization work was done by me. So no, My Action Figure Customs, they don't generally sell full figures. They have in the past, but not as a rule. See what else we got here for questions. Mythic Legions feels what got me hooked on the line. Yep. So William saying they work with me, not for me. It's a team of like-minded fans. Absolutely. He says it much better than I do. They are very much a team. We actually have a feature on Rob and on My Action Figure Customs getting ready to come on the website as well. And even just hearing his replies to some of the questions I asked, it is very much, it sounds like it is very much a collaborative team effort, a bunch of artists collaborating on stuff that they're genuinely excited about. So it's cool to see Kevin doing that. But what about Zombie? So what's Zombie up to? Zombie is some of the pieces he sculpted, very popular. He did the feline feet and the battle helmets for the Camarodude and the Purplor figures. Those are things he sculpted using traditional methods. And then he actually sent to, I think it was GD Lake, I think Rob had said, that actually digitally scanned those in. But someone scanned those in to make them available to actually be 3D printed. I know those were super popular pieces as well. But what he's doing for My Action Figure Customs now a lot is actually painting. So My Action Figure Customs, they do two things. They do sell heads. Oop, I almost dropped it. They sell heads like this. So this is what it comes as. This is actually a head they did of Eddie Salvatore as a dwarf. It's actually the one My Action Figure Customs head that I don't have painted or anything or primed right now. I never found a use for it yet, so I still had this. But this is what they come looking like. It's just this, you know, the resin type feel. Very super smooth. You know, it's not, if you've ever seen, you know, 3D printers that have like the lines and all the, you don't see any of that with this. It's super, super smooth. So that's how you would get a unpainted head. But they do also offer painted heads from time to time. Zombie is one of the painters that does those, along with a gentleman named Chris Middlecamp or Hobby Lobby. Any of you who listen to My Wife Is Going to Kill Me podcast, you're probably familiar with Hobby Lobby. This is actually a piece that I got painted from him. And I said I got painted from him. I ordered this through one of the, a while ago, a My Action Figure Customs pre-order where they had these heads. This Draven Enraged head, that's actually being offered. An unpainted version was being offered recently. I believe the Raged head sold out, but the Calm face is still available. Last time I checked, it was. But I remember when they first showed this head, it was one that I thought was really cool, but I was like, I'm not going to paint it well. I know what I'm good at painting. I know what I like painting. I looked at a lot of the detail on that, and I said, I don't really feel like painting that. So when they actually offered one painted by Chris Middlecamp, I was super excited, and I picked that up. But one thing I definitely am super excited about, I said earlier that they don't generally sell full figures. They sell either unpainted heads or accessories or painted pieces occasionally. They have sold just a few times fully painted figures. And this was one that I got lucky. They had one of them available. I happened to log on early one morning, right when the sale started, and there it was, and it was available. This is the only piece I'm showing tonight that I didn't actually work on, but this was fully worked on by Zombie 13. He did everything, all the paints on this, and I just thought it was so cool. And because I have some of his work in my collection already, I love the idea of having a full piece by him. So this is one that he did, this kind of like zombie undead Templar knight. And that head is just so much detail in that. I mean, it's a great head to begin with. And it's funny because I've had these heads, the bearded heads. I've painted them myself, and seeing his paints on it, they're just, every time I look at it, they're so, so stunning. I get so lucky to grab this. This was one of the few times, like I said, they sold a full figure. But Zombie is now doing this. He is painting these heads on My Action Figure Customs. So when you see any of the painted pieces, it's either going to be by Zombie 13 or Chris Middlecamp. Drew Grubbs is actually doing some pieces now. He's been showing some progress pics of him doing some of the wounded orc type figures. That's awesome. And I've even heard Rob mention that Nikki might be doing a few pieces. So all very, very cool stuff that you can get right through My Action Figure Customs. Nate brought up a good point. He said, be mindful not to drop those 3D prints. They're nice plastic, but they can shatter. I agree wholeheartedly. I have shattered a number of My Action Figure Customs pieces. I had one that I had done at Legions Con. I showed for the first time my G.I. Joe inspired rock and roll dwarf, and it had the big dwarfen rifle. I dropped that one day here. I was taking him out for a photo shoot, and I dropped the figure, and that rifle literally exploded. I've had other pieces that have little like ears or little horns. If you drop those and they hit perfectly right, they will break. So you definitely do need to be careful with those 3D prints for sure. Another really cool piece from My Action Figure Customs is this one here. This Lee Robinson did these sculpts, these Ratman sculpts that he called the Rodaire. And I bought, they had a couple different styles. I bought these, and it's funny because I was really into the idea of Ratmen. I really liked the characters I created with them, but when I posted those, they were so popular. It's funny because I talk about this with like Nikki and with Dennis and stuff all the time. You never know which of the customs you post are going to really be popular, which ones people are really going to like the most. I've had pieces that I post that I'm super proud of that don't seem to get the kind of attention that I was expecting. And then I have other pieces that, I mean, I like them, but they're definitely not my favorites. They're definitely not as much work as some of the others that for whatever reason they resonate. People really, really like them. These were a fair amount of work. I painted all those heads and really tried to flesh out some characters. He's one of a trio I did. But these were some great heads that they sold both unpainted and more recently painted as well. And I'm showing a variety here because that's one of the great things about My Action Figure Customs is there's so much variety. There is absolutely, whether it's weapons, accessories, heads, they're doing torsos, they have so much that they're producing that there is something for everybody. They absolutely will have something for you. And the last piece I have is the big guy back here. So this guy was one that I expected to get some love, and I was right. This is one I definitely was right about. This Cthulhu-looking head, this was actually available as an exclusive at Legions Con last year. And they did have a handful of extras after the show. I don't believe Rob ever sold them. He sold them unpainted at the con. I don't think he ever sold them unpainted on the website. He had Zombie paint up a couple of them, and they sold painted versions. And they were painted green. I bought two at the con. One that my son wanted painted green to go on his Kurzog figure. So he went the very traditional Cthulhu type route. I immediately didn't want to go that route. I was like, that's what everyone's doing. Everyone's painting them green. And the only person I saw painted a different color was Drew. And he did like some crazy different colors on it. Really took it in a cool different direction. But I knew right from the get-go, I wanted to put it on an Argamida's body, and I wanted to go with a different look. I call this my drowned ogre. And, you know, I outfitted him. He's got like a big turtle shell strapped to his arm, and I use this kind of netting to look like fish netting and stuff. But this is one that I really dig as well. And like I showed earlier, Matt getting into doing some of the ogre scale heads. You know, Rob and My Action Figure Customs, they're now doing that as well. Make sure it doesn't fall. They're now doing that as well. So they're scaling up. They're doing bigger pieces as well for the ogres. There's one for sale that's on pre-order right now that you can jump on and grab. That's like a half giant. Really cool addition, probably to the Bothar, not Bothar, the Bolthor, the tower. Dennis just showed a really cool piece that used that head as well. So Rob says, we never know which sculpts are going to be popular. Yeah, I can imagine, like I said, as a customizer, being surprised which ones people tend to like more than others. Having the store, I imagine that you deal with that in a big, big way, where things that you think are just going to be super hot end up not being as popular, and other things that, you know, I have to imagine there's times where you have something you held back for a couple sales that you finally get in there and you don't think it's going to be as popular as it is, and it just catches fire. Never know. But again, it's nice that you have so many options. So Eric pointing out, he's correcting me that Chris Middlecamp painted some of the Cthulhu heads as well. Awesome. So before I move past my action figure customs, I have a few more things to show before we kind of wrap up and everything. I will give you kind of my tips for my action figure custom sales. The great thing about my action figure customs is, like I said, the variety, the amount of pieces that the variety of pieces that they're able to offer. You know, obviously the downside to my action figure customs is they're limited and they're flash sales, or flash sale is probably the wrong word because they announce them well in advance. They run for like 2 weeks, but they're limited sales. If you go to MyActionFigureCustoms.com and you look in the link that says the vault, you are going to see an insanely expansive library of pieces they have done. There's a couple in there they haven't ever produced, but the majority have all been made. And most of them have only been offered one time. If you're just getting into this now and you see that, you're inevitably going to see things that you wish you could get your hands on, and they're no longer available. You know, everyone that works for my action figure customs have full-time jobs. This is something they do on the side. So they're offering, you know, a service that we as customizers can enjoy, that they as fans can enjoy as well. But obviously they have time limitations, so they can't do what Shapeways does and print on demand. I'm going to talk about Shapeways in a moment, but they're very different business models. So what I will tell you is this: if you see something during a sale for my action figure customs that you think you might want, buy it. Because if you don't buy it, you might not get a chance at it again. A while back, they did like the Anubis style heads, and one of the heads they did was like a Doberman. It was a dog, and they did it both with the headdress and without. I've still been waiting for Rob to offer that Doberman again, because at the time I had no ideas for it. But then well after it sold out, I got ideas, and now I don't have access to it. So if you think you could possibly want to use it, and you can afford it, of course, buy it. If you get it in and you realize after a little while that, you know what, I'm never going to use this, trust me, you will be able to sell it or trade it. There are people that will have missed it that will want it. So there's definitely some value in having those pieces and being able to offer them to others. Because ultimately, like I said, if you see a piece and you don't jump on it during the sale, there's a very good chance that you are not going to have access to it again. Or if they do offer it again, it will certainly be well down the road. So that's kind of my thoughts on my action figure customs, but they are not the only 3D printing game in town. I've mentioned Shapeways a few times. They're the first, I said they were my first real entry into 3D printing, and they're still doing stuff. I've ordered stuff from them more recently. I will say the quality has definitely improved. At least it seems like it's improved to me. This is a piece that I got from Shapeways recently, and you're not going to see the detail in this because it's so washed out. But you can see they're definitely different materials. They feel very different, quite honestly. And again, this is the best quality print they offered. They feel more fragile actually than my action figure customs. They're definitely lighter, and I think part of that is the way the model is created, in which how the artist does the model. But there are some really cool artists doing work on Shapeways right now. This is a piece by an artist named Sebadam. And I might have said his name incorrectly, but Seba was someone that actually worked early on with My Action Figure Customs. A lot of the early pieces that Rob made for sale were created by him, were sculpted by him. That vampire that we showed that I looked at earlier, the Draven vampire, that is actually one of his sculptures that he did that, you know, Rob commissioned from him. Wonderful, wonderful sculptor. But he's offered, in addition to the stuff that Rob commissioned him for and that Rob offers, Seba also has a shop on Shapeways. If you look up PlanetaryDogToys.com, it'll list everything. And if you click any of his pieces, it'll bring you over to his Shapeways shop. Shapeways is not cheap. They're definitely, you know, on the more expensive side. I find them to be more expensive than My Action Figure Customs. But, you know, there's some cool stuff you're only going to get there. So a few pieces that I'll show from Seba. He's done a number of cat customs. You know, he did some like panthers, some tigers, a couple lions. I actually have a few of his lion pieces that I painted recently, one of which I'm going to actually offer for sale in the coming weeks. But he did this one as well, which I thought was really, really cool. This, like, you know, skeletal kind of cat. So I thought it would be fun. I used a skeleton Legion builder body to actually create kind of like to go with my Camarodude and my Purplor and Balam. I wanted to create this skeletal type feline character. I like that a lot. The tail's actually from a Halloween decoration that I got. I showed this at Legions Con last year, but this is a piece that came right from Shapeways that Seba had done. Seba is actually someone that has done some female sculpts. So I showed this one recently. This is my kind of like fairy archer again. I was watching a lot of Carnival Row when I did this one as well. But this uses one of his heads. I think he actually created it to be a goblin, but it looked very fairy-like, very pixie-like to me. Not so much elvish, but more pixie-ish. So that's why I ended up using it not on a goblin, but using it here instead. Wonderful pieces. All of his pieces paint like a dream. And that's one thing I will say, too, about the pieces from Shapeways. They paint wonderfully well. A lot of people ask me, do I prime? I don't. I do base coat, so it's not primer, but I guess it's similar. A lot of these I will base coat out. When I get any of these pieces, I will do a base coat of, depending on the color, usually black. If I'm going with a lighter color, sometimes I'll base it out in a lighter color or gray. Sometimes it's brown, depending what I'm going for. Almost like I would say 80% of the time it's black. Another piece that I debuted at Legions Con last year is one I love. This is my Japanese kind of Oni character. And again, this uses a head that Seba, all those heads that I've shown from Seba, those are all available right now on his Shapeways website. So again, to reiterate, we looked at some stuff earlier that was not available regularly now. Then we saw some of the stuff that you can get on eBay that's easily available. My Action Figure Custom has a rotating schedule that, you know, every couple weeks they're offering either pre-orders or painted pre-orders. Even if stuff doesn't come back, you frequently have an opportunity to get pieces from them. The nice thing with Shapeways is they print on demand. So any of those pieces that I just showed from Seba and the next couple pieces I'm going to show in a minute from some other artists, they're all available on Shapeways at any point you want it. You can go on, you can place an order. You can place an order from different shops, put it all into one cart, get it all shipped at once. That is obviously the advantage of Shapeways, is because that business model allows artists to create models, upload them to a shop on Shapeways, and Shapeways handles the printing and the order fulfillment. That's absolutely amazing. The downside is, like I said, is you're not going to get the kind of attention, the love that My Action Figure Customs brings to the line and the artists on there bring to the line. I don't think you're going to get that necessarily other places. You know, some of the heads that may be offered elsewhere on Shapeways or have you certainly don't have as much attention to detail, as much testing that has gone into it. But it's another option. You know, that's what I'm talking about today. all these different options that you have available to you. Not trying to render strong opinions on this versus that. I think there's room for all of this stuff. So last two artists I want to talk about that are available on Shapeways. One is an artist that I showed today, actually, named Emil Wickman. So he's here in the Cabal, and he's only got 2 different pieces right now in his Shapeways store. But I remember him painting them up and showing them here on the group. I think he's from Sweden, actually. And I thought they were great. I was like, those are really, really cool pieces. One was a vampire, one was an orc. I was like, I have enough vampires and orcs. I never bought them until recently. I had some spare skeleton parts and I didn't know what to do with them. So I said, you know what would be kind of cool? To make like a thirsty vampire, like a vampire who's been sleeping for ages, who just woke up and he hasn't fed, so he's emaciated and very, very thin. And if I paint the bones like a chalk white, it would look maybe like, you know, his skin had just fallen, sunken onto his bones. And to do that, the Carpathia's head, that wasn't going to work for it. That's too fleshed out. But I remembered seeing his head, and that head, someone said today it looked like Lord Voldemort, but that head looked so just kind of sunken, and he's almost like very sad looking, that it really worked well for the character that I wanted to create here. So this is one. If you look up his shop, his name is Urgo, U-R-G-O. That's the shop name that he posts under on Shapeways, but the artist's name is Emil Wickman. Great head, super expressive, and again, paints like a dream. In the last one, so this is a piece that I posted on Monday, and I did this intentionally. I posted this Monday and the vampire today, knowing that I was going to talk about them tonight. And this is one in the spirit of saying you never know what's going to be popular. This is one that I call a fodder bin custom. I was literally in back, just in my fodder bins, throwing pieces together to see what worked. You know, hey, what pieces do I want to combine? What pieces haven't I found a use for? This is by an artist. He on Shapeways, his store is called Mass Customs, M-A-S-S, Mass Customs. His name is Walter DeMarco. He is an artist from Argentina that I've dealt with a number of times. Really cool guy. He actually, okay, so I admit I feel bad. Walter sent me this head maybe like a year ago, a really long time ago. He sent it to me, and he sent it to me because I actually asked him a question about it. I was thinking of using it for a custom, and I asked him a question, and he was super excited that I was going to use his head. So he said, hey, you know, I'm going to have one sent to you. So he actually had one sent to me from Shapeways, and when I got it in, it didn't work for what I wanted, and it sat on my workbench for over a year. I hadn't used it. And I felt bad that I hadn't used it, but I was waiting for that spark of inspiration. And then recently I was just putting some pieces together. Travis actually sent me, I bought some stuff off him, and he sent me a couple freebies. And one of the pieces he sent me was a NECA Dante's Inferno figure, which is where this waist piece came from in this cross weapon. And that piece started me down this, you know, oh, let me add this, let me add this. I can finally use this head. So I put this all together as a character I called Baron Sorrow, which actually, as I was doing this, I was watching a show on Netflix called Daybreak. And there's a character in Daybreak called Baron Triumph. And I didn't want to call him Baron Triumph. So I said, well, what's the opposite of Triumph? So I went to thesaurus.com and looked up, you know, the opposite of Triumph, and Sorrow was one of them. And I said, oh, Baron Sorrow. Yeah, that's what I'm going to call him. So he was named kind of because of Baron Triumph from Daybreak. But I loved this head. Super easy to paint. This is a perfect example of a head, whereas if you're getting started with customizing and you're feeling intimidated, starting with something like this is the way to go, because it's not a face, there's no eyes to paint, there's no, you know, facial features. This is literally a coat of black base. I did some dry brushing silver on it to get that scuffed look to match kind of the Urzot pauldrons. And then I did a little bit of dry brushing with brown to get that dirty, grimy type look on it. Really easy head. Walter does great work. He's actually got a bunch of different things. If you checked out Luis's customizing corner feature on the website from last week, he posted like a fire demon that actually used a piece that Walter from Mass Customs had done as well. He's done a number of other things. If you check his site out, he's got some really, really cool stuff coming up. And he's got some cool stuff brewing. Actually, I did some stuff with Walter recently. Him and I were just talking one day about figures I'd like to see and some ideas I had, and he had some ideas. So he worked on a little piece for me specifically that I wanted to see, and pretty excited about that. I've been kind of messing around with some ideas. A little early to share any of those, but very cool stuff. I was actually working on some of that before tonight's broadcast, and I'll be honest with you, it's some of the most exciting custom stuff that I've done in a really, really long time. I was super excited to be there. So more on that soon. But in the meantime, those are some things you can look up. If you check out the MyActionFigureCustoms sale, they've got a sale going on right now. See what they have offered. Check out Shapeways. I just gave you 3 different shops you can check out. PlanetaryDogToys is Saba's shop. He's got some great stuff. Mass Customs is Walter's shop. That head, he calls it like a marine head. That head, that knight head, Baron Sorrow came from that. And then also Emil Wickman, Urgo, R-U-G-O. Those are 3 cool things that you can buy there. And again, one of the great things is different shops, you can put them all in one cart as one, and you can check out. So 2 weeks of talking about, we're at like 3 hours of talking about custom heads. And it's funny because that is such a big topic. I told you last week when I was originally thinking of doing this show and this topic, I was going to cover heads, and I started thinking about what I wanted to show and what I wanted to cover, and all of the great artists that I wanted to introduce people to and talk about. And I realized it's too much to cover in one session. So it really did take 2 full weeks of time to talk about these heads. But to recap the conversation, whether you're using heads from existing figures and you're dremeling them to get them to fit on your legions, or whether you're using pre-painted heads, or any of these heads that you have to paint, or you have to commission somebody to paint for you, this is absolutely a wonderful way for you to start customizing. And then go back to the first video I posted where I was talking about Lord of the Rings figures and breaking them apart and adding some of those pieces. That's the next step. You add those heads and you start adding those parts. You look at this dwarf pirate again here. This dwarf pirate uses this lower piece and this jacket. It's from a Pirates of the Caribbean Captain Barbossa figure from like the last, was it Dead Men Tell No Tales? Super easy to add those 2 pieces on, but it totally fleshes out that character. And there's a number of things you've seen here. The dwarf that I showed you with that cape, painting that cape black to match this hood here totally creates that thief-like looking dwarf. This Rodeer custom that I showed, this uses a jacket from a Lord of the Rings figure. I pulled it right off, slipped it right over. Super easy to start adding those pieces. Once you get those heads and you start looking at these pieces from other toy lines, you can start really creating characters. And that's actually a topic I'm going to cover in a future episode of Mythic Conversations, really starting to think about character creation. I said a few weeks ago, if you have topics you'd like me to cover, contact me. Let me know what you'd like me to talk about. And I actually had a couple people that asked me to talk a little bit about how I write the stories for my characters. Because when you check me out on Instagram, I write stories for these things every day. I'm going to talk more about not just the stories, but really the ideas behind character creation, and how you can start doing some of that by combining these parts. So that's a future episode. But that's what I have for tonight. Let's see if we have any questions here. Drew says Vincent Garma has some cool stuff from Shapeways. Yeah, I've never actually picked up any of Vincent Garma's stuff. I believe he did the really cool, what's that thing called that Dennis did? The Githyanki. he did the Githyanki looking sculpt, I believe. That was really cool. Dennis did a really neat custom with that. That's like a super traditional Dungeons and Dragons race. It's funny because I saw that and I liked it, but Dennis's was so perfect that I saw Dennis's and said, I can't improve on that. He did exactly what I would want. So I never even bothered to take a shot at it. Eric's asking, anyone list the artists that I mentioned? Eric, you can watch it in replay, but I will tell you again, I mentioned PlanetaryDogToys.com. That will bring you to Saba's shop. I mentioned Mass Customs, M-A-S-S Customs. That is Walter DeMarco's shop. I also mentioned Urgo, U-R-G-O, which is Emil Wickman's shop. And then someone mentioned that Vincent Garma has a shop. I'm not sure what name he posts under, but if you put Vincent Garma, you should be able to find it. Or if you just Google Mythic Legions in Shapeways, you'll actually find a bunch of those pieces at a bunch of those shops. Okay. Johnny's asking me to post a list of this. So when I get done this, I said I'm going to post pictures of all of these in the actual post that shows better pictures of all these. I'll actually mention the shops that I mentioned as well and the artists, not only the Shapeways stuff, but I'll mention the artists like Matt and Jim and Zombie 13. I'll put all of them as well and give them credit. Whenever I post my recipes, and again, if you go to my website, mythiccustoms.com, I post recipes for literally everything that I have here. I'll tell you all the parts that I used. I give credit to every artist that I work on, every artist whose pieces that I work with. I'm a big proponent of that. I want people to know where to get these things if they want to do something similar. So you can always check that out as well, but I will share that here. Yeah, Walter, thanks for showing your stuff. Absolutely, man. Happy to do it. Thank you for putting it out. And thank you for the work that you've done with me to kind of bring up some of my ideas to life as well. So with that, I think I'm done. It's 9:01 now. Thank you all very much for joining me for another Mythic Conversations. As always, I got a few things to wrap up with. And what do I always wrap up with? So for sale Saturday, every single Saturday, I put something for sale around 10 a.m. on the Cabal, and I use this kind of vehicle to give, if you tune in or if you catch the replay, you get a little teaser. This week, I'm actually going to be doing a dwarf, and not by I did this intentionally. The dwarf that I'm selling actually uses a third-party head from someone that I've shown today. So one of the artists that I've shown today, one of his heads is going to be on the custom that I sell on Saturday. So Saturdays at 10 o'clock, I do that on the Cabal. I have one to sell. They go often pretty fast. Last week's took a little bit longer to sell. Usually they go pretty quickly. So if you're into dwarves, check that out and you may be interested. Other than that, like I said, nothing much going on. Check out the pre-sale for the pre-order for All Stars 3. I have to think about that for a second. All Stars 3. Got that going on. Continue checking out sourcehorseman.com. We got a bunch of cool articles. I've been working really hard on some new articles for that website. I've been getting a lot of great feedback from fans that have been enjoying all the updates. So we've got a lot of cool stuff coming for you. Again, keep your eyes open for what the Horsemen have in store for Toy Fair this coming weekend. They're not doing a display at Toy Fair. They're not going to be showing Mythic Legions, having a booth at Toy Fair, but they're going to be revealing something in a partnership with a couple other great organizations. So check that out as well. With that, I think I'm done for the evening. I will be back here next week. As I think it's Drew every week says, same Mythic time, same Mythic channel. Is that what you say every week, Drew? Did I steal your thunder by saying that? I hope not. But thank you all very, very much. I will see you next week.